What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another Marvel Snap video, and today we're looking at another tier list update from Marvel Snap Zone. Shout out Marvel Snap Zone, go check them out. They put in a lot of work over there, and I will leave a link to their website down below in the description of this video. But yeah, we're gonna go ahead and take a look at the tier list from them. I did a video on the last tier list from them, and I really enjoyed that, so I want to go ahead and talk about this updated tier list since the meta has started to settle a little bit more since we're a little bit deeper into the season. So let's go ahead and take a look at it. We're not going to waste any time here. Starting off with tier 1, we have Lockjaw Thanos now at the top of the list, and I think Thanos is actually cracked. You did hear me say in the last tier list video that I think Thanos is actually a really good card. It's just that not a lot of people have access to him, myself included. So I feel like people don't really see the full potential of Thanos yet because not a lot of people have him. Not a lot of people have played against him, but this deck is just absolutely cracked. There's just so many win conditions. Thanos' stones provide so many different utilities. You have Devil Dinosaur, which is just another win condition. Chavez helps with consistency. Shang-Chi and Arrow counter Shuri decks. Leech counters a lot of decks. She-Hulk is just a really, really good card right now. Magneto's a really good card. Sunspot, Quinjet discounts all the stones. Lockjaw lets you cycles the stones in and out of your deck. Yeah, this deck is just absolutely cracked. I think this definitely does deserve to be a tier 1 deck at the moment. Now, is this the best version of a Thanos deck? I don't know. Maybe. Kind of hard to say since I don't have Thanos myself, but this deck does look pretty dang solid. Is it the #1 best deck overall in Marvel Snap? Who's to say? I don't know. That's kind of hard to say. I'm not too sure, to be honest, but it definitely is a tier 1 deck in my opinion. Next up, we have Zabu Darkhawk. Zabu Darkhawk still hanging in there strong after the nerf to Zabu. Yeah, this is still a pretty solid deck, honestly. You still have multiple win conditions with the Darkhawk and the Shang-Chi, not Shang-Chi, the Devil Dinosaur, but you do have Shang-Chi in here to counter those big Shuri decks. You have Mystique to copy either the Devil Dino or the Darkhawk. You got Zabu to discount all your 4-cost cards. So a really, really strong deck. I haven't been seeing it as often lately. I haven't been running into it on ladder, but I think since Darkhawk is going to be getting downgraded later in the series drop, I think more people are going to be playing this deck. And yeah, this deck just outputs a crazy amount of points while clogging your opponent's deck with the rocks from Korg and Rock Slide. So I think this is a very, very solid deck. And of course, we still have Shuri Zero at tier 1. Now, what I will say is I have been playing Shuri myself lately, and I've been playing against other Shuri decks, and I think the Sauron version is actually the inferior version of the Shuri Zero decks. I think the better version is the one that runs Armor and Cosmo, because that protects your big units from Shang-Chi, which is one of the biggest counters against this deck, and it protects Cosmo can protect your cards from Arrow as well, which is another big counter to this deck. So I think Shuri Zero is definitely still a tier 1 deck. However, I think the Sauron version is inferior, and personally, I'm not a big fan of Arnim Zola. I know a lot of people really like Arnim Zola, but I don't know. I don't really like him, to be honest with you. Yeah, that's why the version that has Armor and Cosmo does not run Arnim Zola, but a still very solid deck regardless. Now, going into tier 2, we got another Thanos deck, and that is Thanos Ongoing Zoo. So another Thanos deck with Devil Dino, and we got some Zoo style cards in here with Khazar, Blue Marvel, Ant-Man. And really, it's just because of the stones, right? All the stones are 1-cost cards, so they're all going to get buffed by Khazar, which is really nice. And you have a lot of ongoing cards here, so you get to buff them by 2 with Spectrum. So this is very, very strong as well. Is this better than the version they had in tier 1? Probably not, because I feel like Lockjaw is really valuable with the stones, that you can cycle them in and out of your deck. And it also, that deck had Leech, Arrow, Shang-Chi, just a lot of really good cards. This deck is definitely more vulnerable to things like Killmonger right? But still a very solid deck regardless. So I think this deck definitely does deserve the tier 2 spot. Something that could be considered in this deck is Dazzler, one of the new cards. But again, that's a card that not a lot of people have. So could be something you can throw in here, maybe Valkyrie as well. Next up, we have Lockjaw Thor, which in the last meta report, they had this deck in tier 1, which is something I did say I disagreed with. I think this is a tier 2 deck, maybe even tier 3, to be honest. Yeah, personally, I'm just not a big fan of Lockjaw decks. It's just kind of high rolly. You can make it a little bit more consistent with the Jane Foster and America Chavez and those cards. But yeah, overall, I think it's an okay deck. But yeah, you can get screwed over by Cosmo just denying your on reveal abilities. And yeah, sometimes you could get screwed over by what your Lockjaw pulls. So can be sort of a random deck, but there are a few cards in here to minimize the RNG. So tier 2 is fair. I would still say maybe tier 3. But yeah, it's a decent deck nonetheless. Next up, we have Galactus. Galactus, I gotta say, I've been facing a lot of Galactus decks lately, and it is frustrating, man. Like, I don't know what it is about Galactus decks. It's either like Galactus is coming and you counter them and you win, or you don't counter them and you lose. It's a very frustrating matchup. I would say that Galactus is tier 2. The thing is, Galactus decks are very predictable, but like I said, even though you can predict them, sometimes you just don't have the counters to them. And yeah, you just end up losing, right? What I will say about this version is I think the version running Null is the better version of Galactus, but I know Null is a Series 5 card, so not a lot of people are going to have that card, and not a lot of people have Galactus in the first place. But it definitely does seem like I've been facing a lot more Galactus decks lately. You're not going to get a lot of 8 cube victories with this deck, but you're definitely going to get a lot of consistent 2 cube, maybe 4 cubes wins with this deck. And I'd probably put this above the on reveal Lockjaw deck. Actually, I think this deck is better than that. All right, and then in tier 2 we have Death Wave. I think this deck is kind of just like old reliable, right? Like, it doesn't do anything uniquely special, but it's just a very, very strong deck. You can destroy a lot of cards with Killmonger, Carnage, Yondu counts as a destroy. And then you can play Wave on turn 5, and then you can play Death plus She-Hulk plus Chavez or Arrow on turn 6 for just an absurd amount of points. So I think this deck is definitely one of the best right now. It's fairly predictable, but again, that doesn't mean that it's not a bad deck by any means. It's just a predictable deck, but a very, very strong and consistent deck. So let's move on to tier 3 here. We have Discard Dracula. And I gotta say, I don't like this deck. I don't like the randomized discard cards. I think now that we have MODOK, which discards your entire hand, it's another targeted discard card, right? So you don't need the random cards like Moon Knight, like Swordmaster, like Hellcow, which are going to discard random cards from your hand, and you could end up discarding something you don't want to, like your MODOK or your Dracula, which are your big win conditions in this deck. I really think all you need now is Colleen, Lady Sif, and MODOK. Since those are all targeted discards, you know what you're going to discard from your hand. So I don't like the Moon Knight, Hellcow, or Swordmaster in this deck list. Lockjaw, I can kind of see it, but I'm not a big fan of Lockjaw in discard decks. And I know I'm a big Lockjaw hater. I'm sorry. I'm sure there's a lot of people who like Lockjaw. But I think Lockjaw is very strong in Thanos decks, like I said before. But in discard, I could maybe see it, I guess. I would probably put in Wolverine and Sunspot, to be honest with you. Maybe even Storm to get rid of some tricky locations. Because usually Dracula or Morbius can win a lane on their own. So yeah, I think discard is definitely maybe like tier 2, maybe tier 3, but this version of this deck is a pretty poor discard deck in my opinion. I think there's definitely a better way to build this deck. So yeah, don't really like how that's built. And next up we have Negative Zabu, but it's really a negative Silver Surfer list. I think this is actually the only Silver Surfer list on this tier list, and I'm not sold on the Mr. Negative version of Silver Surfer. I think if you're still going to play Silver Surfer, you're either going to play Patriot Silver Surfer deck, because Patriot runs a lot of 3-cost cards anyways, like Patriot, Mystique, Debris, Cyclops, or you're going to run a more control style Silver Surfer deck with Storm, Juggernaut, Killmonger, Cosmo. So I think this is not the way to go with the Silver Surfer deck, in my opinion. I will say I do not have Bast. Bast definitely makes this deck a lot better though, so that is something to keep in mind. Maybe I'm wrong, right? I don't have Bast, so I haven't really experimented with Bast in this deck, but I do like that Psylocke and Zabu makes your deck more consistent to play Mr. Negative on turn 3, so I do like that about this deck, but I'm not sold on the Silver Surfer package in this deck list. And then in tier 4, we have Cerebro 2. I think that's fair. I think Cerebro 2 is a decent deck, not a great deck. I wouldn't necessarily recommend this deck to climb unless you really, really love Cerebro. Shout out to all those Cerebro players out there. Yeah, I think tier 4 is fair. This deck is decent. There's just a lot of things that can screw up this deck with the locations, but you do have things to kind of mitigate that RNG with the Luke Cage and the Storm. I do like M'Baku in this deck list. Hazmat, I'm not a huge fan of personally, but the rest of this deck does look pretty solid for the most part. And last but not least, we have Hela Discard in tier 4. And this, I think I can agree with. If in the last tier list video, you did hear me say that I think the Hela version is the inferior discard version. I think the Morbius Dracula version is the more consistent version out of the two. So yeah, tier 4 is fine. It's kind of a high rolly deck, you know. Hela is going to bring back your cards at random locations, so you can't pick where they're going to pop up. So yeah. And Invisible Woman can just get countered by a Cosmo or something like that, right? Or you can pull it to a different location with Polaris. There's a lot of different ways to counter Invisible Woman. So a pretty inconsistent deck in my opinion, but it still can be strong if you get those really high rolls. Not going to go over the budget decks again, since those are just really like pull 1, pull 2 decks, and I don't think they really update these. They should probably update these. Marvel Snap Zone, if you guys are watching, maybe you should update the budget options. But anyways, let's move on to the silent performance of the week. Now here we have Valkyrie Control, which, to be honest, it's just another Thanos deck. Like, it's really just another Thanos deck with the addition of Valkyrie, and then Beast, and then Spider-Man. So yeah, Spider-Man, Professor X, Valkyrie give you a little bit more control options. Storm as well to lock down a location. Beast, you can bounce back the stones and replay them. Yeah, I think this is a pretty solid deck list. I think Valkyrie actually works very, very well with Thanos. So yeah, I would say this is probably like a tier 2 deck, to be honest, but I think it's in the silent performers category because they're not really seeing it played a whole lot, so they probably don't have enough data on this deck specifically. But yeah, I think it is a pretty solid deck. Next up, we have Zabu Control, which is essentially just a Sarah deck list, but it is a little bit different than the standard Sarah deck list because they have She-Hulk and Moon Girl and Magic in here. So it's kind of like a Sarah deck with like a She-Hulk, double She-Hulk combo to it, right? Because you can duplicate the She-Hulk with Moon Girl, and then you can play Magic on turn 5, and then you can skip turn 6 and then play 2 She-Hulks on turn 7. I'm not completely sold on this deck right now, to be honest with you. Like, I like the Sunspot She-Hulk combo, but I don't like Sunspot and Killmonger in the same deck. Like yeah, you can protect the Sunspot with the armor. I'm sure that's what the armor's for, but then the armor does kind of conflict with your Shang-Chi a little bit. I don't know, this deck seems a little bit awkward to me. I feel like Enchantress doesn't get a lot of value in the current meta at the moment. Moon Girl, if you're not duplicating your She-Hulk, then what else do you really want to duplicate, right? Like, I feel like if you don't have She-Hulk in hand and you play Moon Girl, it's just kind of like whatever. Magic, I feel like Magic is not really in a good spot right now, to be honest. I feel like most of the time, if you're playing Magic, you're more likely helping your opponent than helping yourself. Unless you have a deck like really built for Magic, like the She-Hulk Infinite combo they had last week. I think that deck is actually better than this one. Yeah, not really a fan of Magic in this deck, to be honest. I personally, I don't think I would recommend playing this deck. I think actually, you know, reflecting on it, the tier list they had last week, I think the She-Hulk Infinite combo is actually a better version. And then lastly, we have Electro Ramp. I think Electro Ramp is a decent deck. Silent Performers seems about right. I don't really see Electro Ramp all that often, but it can be pretty scary. Like, I mean, all your opponent needs to play is, let's say, Ebony Maw or Sunspot on 1, Scorpion on 2, Electro on 3, and they could play Leech on 4. Leech on 4 is very deadly. And then Doctor Doom on 5, Odin on 6. That's a lot of points. That is a lot of points. So this deck is yeah, it can be good. Sometimes Doc Ock can fire back on you. I see the Arnim Zola to combo with the Black Panther, but if you don't have Black Panther in your hand, what else are you going to use Arnim Zola on? I guess you can use him on the Doc Ock, I guess. Heimdall for a little bit of surprise value. I do like that. Pull your opponent's cards with Dr. Octopus in the right lane, and then slide all your cards to the left with Heimdall. I think that's a pretty cool combo. Yeah, I think this is a decent deck. I feel like Electro Ramp is always going to have some place in the meta, and I think actually Leech is in a really good spot right now as well with the current meta, and I think Wave is pretty good for disrupting some other decks as well, unless you're playing against Death Wave, right? All right, well, how do you guys feel about this tier list? I would say I agree with most of these things. I definitely think Thanos is in a very good spot at the moment, but it is kind of hard to accurately gauge exactly where Thanos decks are at the moment, because not that many people have him. But from what I've seen, Thanos is very strong. Darkhawk is still strong. Shuri decks are still strong. Galactus is still kind of doing its own thing, and Death Wave is a reliable and consistent deck, and everything else is just kind of mixed mash in between, right? And there's still Devil Dino decks out there. I've been playing Devil Dino myself. There's still some Patriot decks out there. There's still some Silver Surfer decks out there. I'm just waiting for Move to become meta again, right? Like, I have tried so many times to make a Move deck work, and sometimes they can output a crazy amount of points, but they're just not very consistent, unfortunately, and they don't really run a lot of tech options. So yeah, maybe one day Move will be good and make its way into the meta. But yeah, once again, thank you Marvel Snap Zone for writing up this tier list. They basically did all the work here. I'm just here giving my thoughts and opinion on this tier list. So go ahead and go show them some love. Again, I'll leave a link to their website in the description down below. And yeah, once again, thank you guys for watching. Appreciate you. And if you want to see more of these kind of tier list meta updates from me, let me know. I want to see what you guys like to see from me, and I want to keep you guys happy. Makes me happy, and it's a win-win for everyone. So once again, thank you for watching, and see you in the next one. Later.